StraighTAllDay.com. Tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve is yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves anyone out there, including yourself, especially yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And what we do over here is we take all of this and we put this together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, one philosophy, one book, one show, one community, one everything that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic, we are going into part 2 of 2, where I tell you my favorite podcast to listen to, the stuff that I like to listen to, the stuff that if I need something from my brain, what am I paying attention to? These are shows number. I did 1 through 7 in yesterday's episode. Today we're going to do 8 through 15. The shows I listen to, who they are, who hosts it, how I came across it, and why. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Number 8 show that I listen to is James Altucher. And this show is an eponymous show. It's called The James Altucher Show. Now, James Altucher, I first came across, I don't even remember. I don't know how I initially heard of James, but he's been podcasting. He's been in the podcast game for a minute. He was podcasting before the podcast wave. I think the podcast wave happened probably around 2017. I remember listening to James Altucher's podcast back in 2014. I remember listening to it. It might have even been 2013. I was listening to James Altucher. So he was a little bit earlier than most. I mean, he wasn't the start. He didn't start it, but he was earlier than most when it came to the podcasting wave. And what James Altucher does, his show is similar to Tim Ferriss in that he focuses on interviewing peak performers, and he even uses that phrase, peak performers, and just finding out, how they do what they do. But his process and his approach is vastly different from Tim Ferriss, and that they're similar in certain ways in that they're both, white guys talking about white guys between the 40 and 50 age range, talking to people who are really well known or maybe not even so well known all the time, and just dissecting how they became successful. They're similar in that way, but James is a little bit different from Tim, a lot different from Tim in that he is not as formal. Tim is a little bit more of a formal guy. He has a much calmer energy. Tim Ferriss himself, James Altucher, just listen to him talk, even if you looked at him, he has a much different approach than Tim Ferriss, much different personality. Now, James's background, as opposed to Tim was an entrepreneur who then became an author, and his whole career, kind of his whole franchise launched off his authorship. James, it comes from the background of he was an entrepreneur. He's done startup businesses, started his own businesses, invested in startups, but a lot of stuff that he does in finance. Still to this day, he works in finance, does things. And then he started writing about just telling his story. He just stripped himself naked in his writing online, just writing about his failures, writing about his story and the times things didn't work and the times he went through divorce and all the insecurities that he felt about himself. And that's where I initially came across him, was just how naked his writing was. That's how I initially connected with the guy. And then I started listening to his podcast where, again, he does these great interviews with people, and he really goes deep with them on things. And he asks these questions, these off-the-cuff questions that you wouldn't expect to be asked during the interview. He interrupts people when they start telling a story. He goes into the tiny nooks of their stories and the details that people usually gloss over when they're telling their story. Really good stuff. I really like James's approach. And he is a hell of a writer as well. So he's a guy, James Altucher is one guy. Looking at this list, let's see, between Russell Brunson, I would say you can read his books. Besides myself, the only other guy on here that is a consistent writer of the 8 that I've gone through so far that you really should read their stuff, James Altucher is one of those. Any of you who wants to become a better writer, and some of you who have worked with me directly, I mentioned this guy's name to you already, so you have heard him before. If you want to become a better writer, you want to get better at telling stories, you want people to really connect with you as a person when you're writing, read James Altucher. His stuff is incredible in the way that he writes, because everything is personal. Everything is a story. Yes, he gives you takeaways. Yes, he gives you the point and the thing that you need to get from it. But he puts so much of himself in it. And he is so soul-bearing in his writing that it inspires you to be a better writer. Like when I read a James Altucher article, I'm inspired to go write my own article. Not because I'm going to tell the same story he told. I can't because I didn't live his story. But that's how good of a writer James Altucher is. And I think that's one of the best compliments I can give somebody. The guy's a hell of a writer. And on his show, he interviews different types of people who Tim Ferriss interviews. They've had some people similar, but amazingly, with James having done probably another 400 or 500 episodes of his show, I'm looking in the feed now to see how many episodes James has of his show. He's got a leg up on Tim. He's been in the game a little bit longer. He's up to today, as of today, he's up to episode number 651. And a lot of the episodes when James puts his out, and he does long interviews too. His last couple of interviews, 1 hour, 40 minutes, 2 hours, 48 minutes, an hour, 29, 2 hours, 14 minutes, an hour and 7 minutes, an hour and 15, 2 hours and 20 minutes. So he does these long form interviews as well, and he'll throw in a few short ones here and there. And I think he's experimented with that and found his audience really like the longer ones. So what I like about both him and Tim Ferriss is that they go deep with their guests. James says every time he has a guest on his show, he gets all of their books, if they've written books, and he reads every single book that they've written. He listens to their interviews. He finds out all about them. So then when he interviews them, he can ask them things that they don't normally get asked. He goes beneath the surface. Again, I told y'all about this in the episode with how to be a better podcast host. Go beneath the surface with your guests. That is what your audience deserves. Give your audience that, and I guarantee your show will become more popular instantly. James does this. Tim Ferriss does it. All the best podcast hosts who have guests on their show, they do this all the time. So James Altucher's show is number 8 on his list. Number 9, and today we are talking about, this is part 2 of 2, the podcast that I like to listen to. Number 9 is Akimbo, Akimbo. Akimbo, the host of this show is Seth Godin, Sethgodin, Seth Godin. Now, Seth is a guy who I've been reading his work. Let me back up. Seth is another OG of the online marketing and publishing game. Seth has been blogging since before blogging started. All right, Seth has been blogging. He puts out a blog post every single day. Same way this show comes out every day. Seth has been putting out a blog every day before I even had a website. Seth has been blogging since before social media existed, before YouTube, before Facebook or Twitter. He's been doing it for that long. I think he's been blogging for that long. Now, his articles are not super long. Seth's articles, his blogs that he puts out, you can read them in about 60 to 90 seconds every day. But it's coming out every day. It's probably one of the most read blogs on the internet, Seth Godin's blog. Go look him up and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. Always something pithy, useful, direct, getting straight to the point. He doesn't put a whole lot of storytelling in his, as opposed to James Altucher. And when you tell a story, you got to give so much context. Seth doesn't really do much storytelling. He gets to the point, but he comes about it in a way that makes you think every single time. And that is what a great writer does. A great writer doesn't mean you wrote something long or something short. A great writer is going to give you something to think, something that inspires you, something that changes the way that you look at things. Seth does it, James does it. They do it in 2 completely different ways, but they both get it done. Now, Seth has been he used to be a book packager, meaning they would package up people's books and help them sell them. And I can't even explain book packaging any better than that. He can explain it. You go find Seth, ask him yourself. But he has written probably 20 books. He is in the Marketing Hall of Fame for the work that he's done in the marketing world. He actually, those of you who are basketball fans, Seth looks just like NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. So if you look up Adam Silver and look up Seth Godin, they look alike. And I haven't heard anybody else make that comparison. The first time I saw Adam Silver, I said he reminds me of Seth Godin. But anyway, Seth is a hell of a writer. He's a hell of a thinker. And on his show, Akimbo, I don't even know how to describe this show. Let me see if I can. I'm just going to pull it up and see if I can find his description of his own show so I can tell you what Akimbo is about. What Akimbo is, let me see here. I'm just in the podcast app looking it up. So he says, Akimbo is an ancient word from the bend in the river or the bend in an archer's bow. It's become a symbol for strength, a posture of possibility, the idea that when we stand tall, arms bent, looking right at it, we can make a difference. So this podcast is about culture and how we can change it, about seeing what's happening and choosing to do something. The culture is real, but it can be changed. You can bend it. So that's what Akimbo means. This show has 1.5 thousand ratings, 1,500 ratings, not a million ratings, 1,500 ratings, and it has a 5.0 vote. Seth, yeah, he's pretty damn good at what he does. And again, his episodes are not very long. They're usually 20 to 30 minutes, and it's just him talking. And here's what's great about Seth's show is that according to Seth, and I believe him, he doesn't even make notes for his shows. And if you listen to him talk, you would think that he's reading from a book. It sounds like he's dictating, right? It sounds like he's reading something, just reading it out loud to you. But according to Seth, all he does is come up with an idea. He turns on the mic. He just talks off the top, straight off the top is how he does his show. And if you listen to him talk and then realize that he's doing it off the top, you're like, how the fuck? Like, it's incredible for somebody to have that skill. And the way that he speaks is like listening to me talk. If I was to transcribe everything that I say on this show, I would have to do a good amount of editing to make it read right. Listening to Seth talk, it sounds like he's reading words that have already been edited perfectly. That's the way that he speaks. It's amazing. It's an incredible skill. And that's just attesting to the amount of time that he's had in his game, the amount of time he's spent thinking and writing and articulating himself and taking his ideas and putting them out to the world, that he can do it in that way, that his speaking comes out in perfect prose. I think it was Tim Ferriss who said that. Tim had Seth on his show, and he said this guy speaks in perfect prose, and he absolutely does. It's unbelievable. So go listen to the show and tell me that I'm wrong. Again, that's Akimbo by Seth Godin. Point number 10, today's topic. That's Godin, G-O-D-I-N, Seth Godin there. Point number 10, the topic here today, again, we are talking about my favorite podcast to listen to. Now, these next two that I'm going to give you are two shows that I haven't listened to a bunch of their episodes. They're more new to my list. I have added them because I'm interested in the host, and I'm also interested in some introductory material I heard, so that's why I started listening to them. So I don't have as much to say about them, but I'll tell you about them anyway. This is number 10. Number 10 is called WorkLife, and the host is Adam Grant. Now, WorkLife, I'm going to cheat here, and I'm going to actually pull up this show and just read straight from the description of the show itself so I can tell you what this show is about, because again, I haven't listened to this show as much to be able to just give you my off the top guess of it, or not guess, but my description of it. Adam Grant is a guy who I know that he's a college professor. He's a guy who's written several books. I can't even remember the names of all his books, but he's written a few books and he's done some TED Talks, and he's out there. If you look him up, you'll see him. He's like I said, he's a college professor. This guy's a thinker. He puts new ideas out there into the world. And again, this is the kind of stuff that I'm attracted to. I'm looking for people who give me something for my brain. Give me something to think about. I don't need to be distracted. Give me something that's going to make me think and be better. Now, this show, WorkLife, is new to me, but it is not new overall, because he's actually on season 3 of his show. And the show has over 7,000 ratings. So he's been in the game for a minute. So this is a great thing about podcasting, is that there's always new things coming out. So it has an overall 5.0 rating out of 5 with over 7,000 ratings. And again, they're on season 3. I don't know how many episodes they do each season, but this show is about, as it says, I'm reading straight from their podcast description. You spend a quarter of your life at work. You should enjoy it. Organizational psychologist Adam Grant, so that's what he does for a living, takes you inside the minds of some of the world's most unusual professionals to discover the keys to a better work life. From learning how to love your rivals to harnessing the power of frustration, one thing is for sure, you'll never see your job the same way again. That's very interesting. Now, even though I don't work at a traditional job, this is the kind of stuff that gets me interested, because I know I talk to people who do work at traditional jobs and people who could learn from some of the things that I might learn from Adam, translated through my own experience, put it into the work on your game language, and be able to give it to you. So that's why I listen to shows like this. So I'll give you the titles of some of his episodes so that you have an idea of what work life is about. Burnout is everyone's problem. We don't have to fight loneliness alone. The science of the deal. Career decline isn't inevitable. Reinventing the job interview. Authenticity is a double-edged sword. The fall of WeWork's culture. So how science can fix remote work. So a lot of these episodes is just Adam talking himself. He has a couple of shows where he's actually interviewing people. Not too many, but this is mostly a solo show. And listen, if anybody can respect a solo show, it's me. So I will be listening a lot to Adam Grant. Again, this is called WorkLife by Adam Grant. So any of you want to listen to a show, maybe you already listened to it. I mean, this show is not new. It's new to me, but it might not be new to you. So this is Adam Grant, who is a organizational psychologist. I can't even explain to you what they do. And that's why I listen to it, so I can learn something new. So that is WorkLife. And let's move on to point number 11. The topic here today, I'm talking about my favorite podcast to listen to. This is part 2 of 2. And I'm going through podcast number 8 through 15. Number 11, Starting Greatness. And the host of this show is a man by the name of Mike Maples Jr. Now let me read this description directly from the show. This had also 5.0 overall rating, only 277 ratings. This is a more new show. And here's what it says. Host Mike Maples from the venture capital firm Floodgate offers lessons from the startup super performers before they were successful, featuring interviews with some of Silicon Valley's most legendary entrepreneurs and thought leaders. And then he starts name dropping a few people. So anyway, he talks to Netscape co-founder Mark Andreessen, the founder of LinkedIn, founder of Nextdoor, the Instagram founders, and more. So this show is all about interviewing people about how they started these startup companies that became giants and legends in the business world. How did they get started? What were the ideas that they had? What were the challenges and setbacks that they went through? I don't even know that's what they talk about, but I'm assuming that he's going to ask those questions on this show. Now, I heard a sample episode of this show on somebody else's podcast. This is what some podcasts do. They will pay to have an episode of their show run on somebody else's feed. So for example, if I wanted to promote Work on Your Game, I would take episode number 775, for example. I will call up Tim Ferriss's people and say, hey, how much would it cost for me to buy an episode of your show? And you just put this episode in the feed for your show so that your listeners listen to it. And then some of them will become Work on Your Game fans. That's basically how some podcasts advertise. So they did this show, Starting Greatness. They bought an episode on somebody's feed. I don't even remember which feed it was I heard it on, but I listened to it and I said, this is actually pretty good. So that's what got me to subscribe. So the people at Starting Greatness, if you're listening, your ad buy on somebody else's feed actually worked on me because it got me to subscribe. And now here I am promoting your show on my show. This is how it all works, the ecosystem. So Starting Greatness with Mike Maples is where he'll be talking about how these startup companies became great and the challenges that they faced. I will be listening, and I'm sure I'll have some stories to share from that. Y'all want to know how I always have all these stories that I can tell you? Of course, from my own life, my own stories, but also I listen to stories of other people. So any shows where people tell stories, interview shows, you're always going to get great stories. Stories or any show by an individual person who is good at articulating their thoughts, they're going to have some great stories. So I get stories from all over the place. And then my skill is taking those stories and being able to relate them back to something that I'm talking about here at Work on Your Game, just as a side note for you. Let's move on. Point number 12. Today's topic, we're going through shows number 8 through 15, favorite podcasts that I listen to as of fall of 2020. Number 12, Business Wars. Now, Business Wars is a very popular show. Maybe you already know about Business Wars. If you never heard of Business Wars, that means you probably don't listen to podcasts that much. I would suggest you do start listening to podcasts because these podcasts is a really good way to learn. It's a really good way to get information. Now, Business Wars as a show, I'm just looking at them in the podcasting app. They have over 9,000 ratings. So as I said, this is not a new show. It's a very popular show. And what Business Wars does is they basically make a series out of telling the story of how two companies pitted against each other trying for supremacy. For example, Netflix versus HBO, Netflix versus Blockbuster, Nike versus Adidas, Lamborghini versus Ferrari, Nintendo versus Sega Genesis. They'll do a series. So it might be 10 episodes just going through the timeline of these two companies going at each other and how they competed and how one of them ended up winning. And then what makes it even better is not just the host just telling the story of what happened. They actually kind of act it out. They have the background music and they have these voice actors playing the voices of each individual, whoever the people are in the conversations. Is really good. And they basically reenact the whole story of the battle between these different companies. So let me read their description. Netflix versus HBO, Nike versus Adidas. Business is war. Sometimes the prize is your wallet or your attention. Sometimes it's just the fun of beating the other guy. The outcome of these battles shapes what we buy and how we live. Business Wars gives you the unauthorized, real story of what drives these companies and their leaders, inventors, investors, and executives to new heights or to ruin. Hosted by David Brown, former anchor of Marketplace, from Wondery, the network behind, and they start naming some other things. So anyway, Business Wars right now, the the latest one, they're talking about the Godfathers of Wines. I don't even know what that one's about, so I can't tell you anything about it. But I'm going to look up some of the business wars that they went over here. Pizza Hut versus Domino's. Wouldn't you like to know that story? I would. I'm definitely looking forward to listening to that. FedEx versus UPS. The dating app wars. All of these are really, really interesting. Diamond wars. How companies battled about diamonds. Uber versus Lyft. Again, I'm just scrolling through their feed and just looking at these. Amazon versus Walmart. So the North Face versus Patagonia. What else? I'll give you one more. Starbucks versus Dunkin' Donuts. So these are all different business wars that they go over. And again, it'll be somewhere between 6 and 10 episodes just going over the back and forth between these companies and how they battled it out for supremacy in their market or in their industry that they were working in. So Business Wars is a great show that you can listen to. It gives you just a narrative, just gives you story. It is not so much, hey, here's what you need to do, some tips and mindset and all that. All these other shows are pretty much like that. Business Wars is completely different and is a very well-produced show. When you listen to it, you're like, damn, they really put some time into putting these together. It's really worth your time. So Business Wars is number 12. Number 13, it's a topic again today. We're talking about my favorite podcast to listen to. Number 13 is The Membership Guys. The Membership Guys is a show of two guys, but a lot of times it's just one guy talking, where they're basically talking about how to run an online membership, how to keep your online membership active, some great things to keep it going. This guy goes by the name of Mike Morrison, who's the host of The Membership Guys, and advice, tips, and insight on planning, running, and growing a successful membership website. Now, this one is just more personal and selfish for me. I run membership websites. Y'all know about Work on Your Game University. So this is a place where I learn about what are some good tips and good advice for putting together and running and keeping active people in a membership. And these guys have some really good insight. They've been doing it for a long time. They've run like a mastermind group where they have people who own and run memberships all together in one community, talking to each other and exchanging ideas and exchanging information. And Mike has some really good tips and really good information. I've taken a lot of stuff from his show and applied it to the things that I do, even outside of memberships, because he has some really good insights and some really good ideas because of the time that he's put into running and understanding the membership platforms and membership systems out there. And as we look around at life right now, how so many things are going to memberships, right? Even if you do like Uber or Lyft or Uber Eats or DoorDash and stuff like that, now they're offering memberships so that you don't have to pay the delivery fees and things like that. People like me at Work on Your Game University, we're taking all of our courses, putting them inside of a membership platform. Instead of selling you a course, we'll put you in the membership and you get access to all the courses. And yes, if you didn't know, that is part of Work on Your Game University. So you've been looking for Bulletproof Mindset, 25 hours, 30 days of discipline, ASAP confidence, sell yourself, toughen up. These are all courses of mine. They are all in Work on Your Game University. So go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. But also what we're talking about here is memberships. We know gyms have always had memberships. There are things like, I predict in the future, you're going to see airlines are going to have memberships. You're going to see things like cars are going to have memberships. It may come a point, who knows if we'll be allowed to see it. There'll be a point when automobile dealers won't sell you a car anymore. This is offer you a membership. And then you can drive whichever car you want. As long as you pay the membership, you get a selection of whatever cars they got. Now, it might cost you more for the Mercedes membership than it does the Honda membership, but you get what I'm saying. A lot of software. I mean, if I told you how many different memberships we pay for here at Work on Your Game to keep going what we're doing, to host this podcast, this masterclass, there is a membership. For our software that we run our websites on, there's a membership. Hosting is a membership. All these things cost, and all these things you're paying for on a consistent basis. Now, of course, we want to make back a return on our investment, which we do. But the whole point is a lot of things are going to a membership model. So a membership doesn't necessarily have to be like people paying you for your information. That's what the Membership Guys show is about. But you can use a lot of these insights for other areas of life where there's a membership setup. So if you're looking for that, I would suggest you listen to the Membership Guys show. Not a super popular show, but when I was looking for membership information, they popped up and they are definitely worth a listen. Point number 14. Topic here today is I'm giving you part 2 of 2, my favorite podcast to listen to. Number 14, I'm going to switch these around. I'll give you number 15 first, and we'll do number 14 last. Number 15, Jordan Peterson, the Jordan B. Peterson Show. Now, Jordan Peterson is a guy who wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life. He is I think we can call him a philosopher. I think that'd be a simple way of describing him. I'm not going to Google him or look up his show as I'm talking here. I haven't listened to his podcast a ton yet. And he has a ton of episodes also, so I'm going to I'm gonna have some work to do, as you can, if you're just listening to what I'm saying here. I got my work cut out for me when it comes to this show. Jordan Peterson, he doesn't have a ton of episodes of his show. Looking at his feed, he started back in, it says April. I don't know if that's April of this year or last year. It's looking like he only has about 100 or so episodes of his show. So it's not a ton, but these are long episodes. These episodes like an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, an hour. And I think what he did with these, and he has some of them are interviews, but I think a lot of them are, Jordan Peterson, he's a professor. And he's a guy who has spoken around the world, and I believe he's from Canada, speaking around the country. So he took a lot of his lectures, he recorded them, and then he would put them, I think a lot of people found Jordan, as I did, through the internet. Not the internet, through YouTube, rather. This is all the internet. But through YouTube, his videos of him talking and people making clips and things like that. And then just took those and put them up on the podcast feed, and that's how he got his podcast. A lot of people do their podcasts like that. They just take lectures or something else that they're doing, just rip the audio off and put it up and call it a podcast, which is fine. The material is good, then the material is good. So Jordan's book, 12 Rules for Life, was a great book. I loved it. Great philosophical thinking book, a book that's really going to challenge you to think. So don't buy that book if you're not looking to think. You just want somebody to tell you what to think. That is not the book for you. But Jordan is a really deep thinker, and he's really good at articulating and explaining his point of view. And I can appreciate that in people because I feel like I'm that type of person. So Jordan B. Peterson's show, he goes into all these different types of philosophical topics. So if I just go to this feed and just grab a couple of things off here to tell you, he did a biblical series where he talks about different parts of the Bible. He did this for like damn near 15 episodes straight. I'm scrolling through to see something else that I can find to tell you what he talks about. He talks about maps of meaning, whatever the hell that means. I don't even know what some of these things mean, these things that he's talking about here on this show. As I told you, he's a philosopher, and this guy goes deep. And he has some interviews that he does. Actually, he got a bunch of interviews that he did here over a certain period of time. This is the kind of show you might just want to listen to and see if it's for you. If it's for you, then you'll be good. You'll keep listening. If it's not, then you'll probably know within maybe 2 episodes that this is for you or is not for you. But that's basically how it is. Jordan Peterson is his name. Again, he is a thinker. He is a philosopher. And he's going to challenge you to think. So don't listen to that show if you're not going to be able to actually think along with listening, because that's the kind of show it is. It's not a surface level show. It's a deep one. Point number 15. Last show that I'm going to mention. Again, I'm mentioning the top podcasts that I listen to these days as of the fall of 2020. Just 15 that I'm listening. Number 15, Joe Rogan. The Joe Rogan Show, or Joe Rogan Experience, whatever they call it. Joe Rogan is probably, I think it's safe to say, the most popular podcast in the world as of this recording. This guy is he puts out an episode of his show on YouTube and is getting upwards of 3 million views in the first 24 hours. Every episode he puts out interviews with people that I have never heard of. And I see on YouTube that the video's been out for 1 day and it has like 2 million views. I'm like, I don't never even heard of the person he interviewed. And he is that popular. Joe Rogan is the king of podcast popularity right now. Doesn't necessarily mean he's the best, but he's the king of podcast popularity right now. When he did his interview with Kanye West, which was about less than a week ago as of the date that I'm recording this, that interview got like 6 million views in less than 24 hours. Now, of course, Kanye, there's power in the name Kanye, but also his combination with Joe Rogan made it so big. What I like about Joe Rogan's show, the same thing I said about Jordan Peterson, same thing I said about James Altucher, same thing I said about Tim Ferriss, and the same thing I suggested to you in my episode about how to be a better podcast host. Let me make sure I tell you what episode that was, just in case any of you don't remember what I talked about. Qualities of Most Successful Podcast was episode 1629. How to be a better podcast host was episode 1625, just 2 weeks ago. They go deep. The Joe Rogan Kanye West interview was like 2-3 hours long. Most of Joe Rogan's interviews are 2 to 3 hours long. He interviews people that I've never heard of. I will listen to them because I know in a 2 to 3 hour conversation between two smart people, some good stuff is going to come out of it. I did not know Joe Rogan. Apparently Joe Rogan's a comedian. I've never heard Joe Rogan do comedy, and I'm not really interested in hearing him do comedy. Joe Rogan's a very smart interviewer. He is an objective interviewer. He listens to people. He lets them talk. He goes deep. He asks a lot of questions, is what a good interviewer does. And he brings on all different types of people from different backgrounds, people from either side of any political divide or any conversation. He brings on all different types of people. He doesn't skew his interviews. There's no slant to them. There's no pomp and circumstance. All you do is just see him sitting on one side, other person on the other side of the table. They both have the mic in front of them, and they just start talking. That is how the podcast goes. It is not a super produced podcast. It is the most popular podcast out there in the world. So all of you podcast hopefuls out there asking, what kind of mic do I need to have? Or what kind of camera should I use? Or do I need a producer and all these things? Listen, good conversation is the king of what makes a show good. If the content is good, then you can figure out the rest. All right, the quality of the content will pay for all the bells and whistles. You understand what I'm saying? Joe Rogan is proof of that. Joe Rogan's show, again, he interviews all different types of people from all different walks of life. And the majority of the people Joe Rogan interviews, I have never heard of. All right. Someone just recommended to me maybe a week ago, Billy, who I know is a listener to this show, recommended that I listen to an interview between Joe Rogan and, let me get this person's name who she recommended. Joe Rogan, what's this guy's name? Paul Saladino. I have no idea who Paul Saladino is. I have a little bit of an idea because Billy told me that Paul is a guy who talks about nutrition and things like that. I've never heard of Paul, but apparently a lot of people have because Joe Rogan got Paul on his show. And I'm sure that episode probably has a couple million views already. I never even heard of the dude. Maybe tells you a little bit about the bubble that I live in, or it just tells you how great Joe Rogan is, probably a combination of both. So Joe Rogan's show, he goes deep with every episode. I haven't seen a Joe Rogan interview that was less than 2 hours long. All right, everything is 2 hours and longer. And again, you get a lot of information. And a guy like Joe Rogan, he's only gonna bring smart people on his show. Even if you disagree with the smart person, if you listen to a smart person talk for 2 hours, you're gonna learn something. And again, if you've probably seen a common theme in these shows that I listen to, they're all about learning something. There's only one of them that's really, that I would say is an entertainment show, and that's Bill Simmons, because he talks about sports. So I listen to Bill Simmons when I give my brain a little bit of a break. I'll listen to Bill Simmons. The other 14 shows on this list is all about learning something, challenging me to think, giving me some new ideas, some new stories that I can come up with, some new stories that can help me in what I'm doing, some stories or information I can translate and help you in what you're doing. So does anybody have any question how I'm able to continually come up with content and come up with ideas and come up with topics? It is not because I'm just this genius who comes up with all these things out of thin air. It's also not because I'm just taking what somebody else says and regurgitating it, because if I was, you wouldn't have been listening through 1,600 episodes of this show. It is because I listen to other people who are smart. I get their ideas. I let them challenge my ideas. I let them challenge my beliefs and my thinking and information that I thought that I had. And then I translate that through my own experiences, through the work on your game philosophies and frameworks. And then we have something brand new that comes from it. So that's why 14 out of the 15 shows that I like to listen to are all about challenging thinking and ideas and just new ways of looking at things in the world. So there should be no question as to, there shouldn't be any trivia as to how I am, because look at the material that I'm taking in. I'm laying it bare for you to see, being transparent about it. So all that being said, let me recap these last 8 podcasts that I like to listen to. This is part 2 of 2 of this group. Number 8, James Altucher Show. Number 9, Akimbo by Seth Godin. Number 10, WorkLife by Adam Grant. Number 11, Starting Greatness by Mike Maples. Number 12, Business Wars from Wondery. That's the name of the company. Number 13, Membership Guides with Mike Morrison. Number 14, The Jordan B. Peterson Show. And number 15, The Joe Rogan Experience. These are the shows that I like to listen to. What do you like to listen to? Work on your game better be on that list. Work on your game. We out of here. Dre all